Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and self-appointed foe to the wizards. You know, I was listening to Owen Benjamin's 3 hour and 15 monster live stream today, and it was fascinating because Owen has a unique ability to communicate down. And I don't mean that in a negative sense in the slightest. One of the few other people who's able to do that is Donald Trump. You know, I don't have that ability. I wish I did. But for better or for worse, I don't. And so I understand that. That's why I've never made any effort to become a media whore. That's why when I was given the opportunity to, take a shot at moving into television, I did one screen test with the NBC affiliate and promptly realized this is not for me. This is not what I do. And so it's a little bit ironic, of course, that here I am talking to you in a video medium. But it was really interesting to see how Owen managed to translate and combine two important concepts and put it all together in a single rhetorically effective term. And when he talks about wizard spells, he's really talking about two things. First of all, he's talking about rhetoric. And that's I would say the more material level of the wizard spell. As you know, if you've read my books, SJWs Always Lie, SJWs Always Double Down, I pay a lot of attention to the distinction between rhetoric and dialectic. A lot of you who watch the stream, especially a lot of those of you who read my blog, are dialectic thinkers. And that's fine. That's good. That's normal. The ability to reason, the ability to correctly utilize logic, the ability to change your mind on the basis of information is a very useful skill to have. But many people who have that dialectical ability have a total inability to speak in rhetoric, to understand that they too are influenced by rhetoric, or to even regard rhetoric as being legitimate. You see this in discussions on my blog all the time, less now. I think that most of the regulars, most of the ilk, and certainly all the VFM understand very clearly the difference between rhetoric and dialectic. They even know when I'm speaking one versus using the other. And so it's very difficult for the average person who is primarily a rhetorical speaker and a rhetorical thinker to even understand what we're talking about. To them, it all just looks crazy. And that's what we're seeing a lot when Owen talks about the moon landings, when I talk about the Mandela effect. You see the binary thinkers, and most but not all binary thinkers are also rhetorical speakers. And so what I mean by binary thinker is midwits, normal to midwits tend to think that things are either one way or the other. If you wanted to be philosophical, you could call them Abelardians. It is so or it is not. There is a truth to the idea that there are gray scales, not in terms necessarily of truth, but in terms of probability. To me, the fundamental divide is between the binary thinker and the probabilistic thinker. And so when you take a binary thinker and you say something like, I don't accept the idea that my memory is necessarily incorrect. And they say, but the alternative is that there's a conspiracy, or that there is science beyond what we understand. They cannot conceive that you can be aware of all those things and assign a probability to it. I mean, not in the technical sense. I understand if you're actually doing full probability, then you have the ability to work out what the actual numbers are. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a metaphorical probability where you can't work out the numbers. You can't possibly even know what the numbers are, but you understand that there are varying degrees of likelihood. Now, I understand, for example, that it is, as far as we know, as far as I know, it is impossible, to account for all the physical copies of the Berenstain books that people remember reading are now staying. How do you account for that? Well, there's a number of different ways you can account for that. Okay? One, it could be this incredible, seemingly pointless conspiracy to go around and physically replace every single listing of the books. Every single book that's ever been published that everyone has somewhere, somebody went and physically hunted them down and replaced them. I think that is so improbable as to be actually less likely than the impossible. Now, another possibility is that everybody just made a mistake. Everyone just misremembered what they saw. That is a remote possibility, but I think that it is highly unlikely given the way that so many people remember things that are fairly distinct, fairly easy to remember, and don't make any sense. For example, when you look at the idea that somebody might have just gotten the pronunciation wrong or something, that's fine, totally credible. Absolutely credible. But when you suddenly, when you have people remembering discussions about something that can't possibly make any sense in that light, that's when you start to get a little bit dubious, and there's a lot of, and when you, for example, if you look at the Google Ngrams, you can see that there are a lot of publications in the Google Ngram that refer even now to the Berenstain Bears or Berenstain Bears, as opposed to Berenstain Bears, which are admittedly the dominant one. And then there's also, so then you look at the other possibility, like for example, when you get into the really crazy stuff with the Mandela effect, I don't remember anything in the King James Version about bottles, about how the new wine needs to go into the new bottles rather than the old bottles. That doesn't make any sense. First, They didn't have bottles, in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. They had wineskins. Secondly, I always remember reading wineskins, but, I admit that I was primarily reading the Living Bible when I was younger, the Children's Bible, and then the NIV. So it's possible that I just never happened to read the King James, that particular verse. But then when you look at the idea that they were referring to bottles, that doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make any sense because bottles don't break depending on what kind of wine you put in them. Wineskins do, but the bottles don't. They're the same size. And so, so that's when you start entertaining the possibility, well, what if it is possible for someone, not necessarily today, at some point far in the future, to engage in omnitemporal quantum editing? Now, that's a scary thought, but keep in mind, it only has to be invented once. If you really want to read a mind-bending time travel book, read City Beyond Time. It's actually very scary, very troubling, and very deterministic. But it's fascinating reading. And so, I would strongly recommend that you that you just open your mind to consider these hypotheses. I'm not telling you, I'm not a binary thinker. So I'm not telling you this must be the case. I'm telling you, I believe that X is more likely the case than Y, than Z, than 32, than purple, and yellow. Okay? And that is probably to a certain extent what Owen is doing, but because he is a more fluid and intuitive thinker, he's not necessarily going to break it down in the same sort of clinical manner that I tend to break things down. Let's see. Ben Darling says, Vox, I've seen you write Neil, N-E-A-L, deGrasse Tyson on your blog a couple of times recently. I believe it's Neil, N-E-I-L, at least now. Another Berenstain example. No, it's because I have absolutely no idea how Neil deGrasse Tyson spells his name. For whatever reason, I always focus on remembering that deGrasse has a capital D and a capital G, and I have no idea how he spells Neil. But what I can tell you, for example, is I had a dog named Neil growing up, and I very, very distinctly remember how his name was actually spelled because it wasn't spelled the way that I felt it should have been spelled. And so if you gave me, if you ever tried to tell me or insist that his name had always been spelled one of the two primary alternative ways, I would never believe it. With the Berenstain, I am highly confident that my memory of the EIN spelling is correct, but I am not anywhere nearly as certain as I am that the Wolfenstein spelling is correct. I don't care if every single copy of every single id software and Muse software game suddenly began appearing as Wolfenstein, Castle Wolfenstein, on every Apple II emulator, every box, everything. You would never, ever be able to convince me that it was spelled differently because I am that familiar with Castle Wolfenstein. Which is ironic because I actually pronounced that Castle Wolfenstein, but I said Berenstein. So anyhow, so that's one level. How does the reluctance of people to admit being wrong play into the Mandela effect? Well, I don't think it plays into it at all, because when you talk to people about this, they don't care about being wrong. I don't care about being wrong. I mean, I remember the first time that I saw Berenstain, and I just felt confused. Like, what the hell is that? I was as confused as if I saw Castle Wolfenstein. It made no sense to me. It's kind of like when they changed the Republican Party to red. Just the first time you see it, you're like, wait, what? And then you realize that they changed it. And so, it's just one of those things. And so I'm not saying that there's a lot of people who are saying, not a lot of people. What am I saying? Some of the crazier conspiracy theories revolve around CERN, and they're messing with dark matter, and that's screwing with either our memories or actually changing the past and so forth. But the thing you have to keep in mind is that if we're dealing with a trans-temporal technology, then it could be happening at any time in the future, and we are only happening to notice it at this point in time. Now, I realize that you don't have to tell me, but Vox, that's not possible. You can't change the past, Vox. Do you really think my grasp on the current limits of science are worse than yours? I probably understand a fair amount of this stuff better than the vast majority of you. But what I also understand is the history of science and how often scientists have been wrong about what is possible, and the fact that a lot of the technology that we have today that works just fine seems like magic. If you had shown somebody in 1980 a computer system that had Wi-Fi, it would have looked almost as magic as it would look to somebody from the Middle Ages. I mean, there are still times when I've set my router up and I've got all my stuff working and that sort of stuff, and I'm still blown away by the fact that it works. And so, it's not possible at this point in time. What about the future? Well, here's the thing. We already know, as Christians, we already know that God is transtemporal. We have these discussions all the time about what does God know. Well, if God is transtemporal, then there is an aspect of our souls that are also transtemporal. And so if you think about it, then what is the one thing that can't be quantum edited? The facts can be edited, the material things can be edited, but our souls can't be. And maybe that's why the only thing that is capable of noticing a change like this is a human intelligence attached to a soul. Now, I am not telling you that this is the case, but keep in mind, and this is where we get to the deeper side of what Owen was talking about, the deeper side of the wizard spells. The wizard spells that Jordan Peterson teaches you I mean, I describe in Jordanetics, I spell out how Jordan Peterson uses the 12 rules of life to try to teach people how to create reality altering spells of their own. You have to understand that the powerful, influential people actively seek to alter reality through their words. They tell you this. Who was it? I think it was. I want to say McNamara, but he's the Vietnam guy. Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld was bragging to the media, and he was saying that we are the ones who matter. We are the ones who act. We are the ones who change reality. We are the ones who change your reality and make you adjust to it. No matter what you do, no matter how you react to it, we will still control it because we are the actors and you are the reactors. And in the same way that SJWs try to speak their reality, advertisers try to create their reality. Look at the reality that they're trying to create when you watch TV. They're trying to convince you that blonde women want to be with black men. I mean, if you want to be employable as a model today, about the best thing you can be is a blonde woman with a mixed race child, because they will put you on every advertisement for any product right now, because that's the reality that they are trying to push on you. It's kind of funny, again, when you start to see through it, when you start to recognize the patterns. Like for me, it was funny because there's this, we have British television, and if you see, there's this one black actor who always plays the black guy married to the white woman. I mean, he's literally got at least 15 blonde female fictional spouses. So much, I mean, it's so out of control that we were watching TV a few weeks ago, and my wife said, "Oh, hey, he's actually got a black wife too." It was the same guy, but for once, the wife character in the advertisement was black, because they don't have that many black actors in Britain, and so they have to recycle them a lot. So anyhow, it's really kind of interesting to see how they act. But the point is that when you've got people in positions of power like Donald Rumsfeld, who are actively seeking to dictate and change reality, and they're trying to do it through perceptions, they're trying to do it through words, then they are, how difficult is it to imagine that if they had that technology, they would do so, And then you have to start asking yourself, well, why would they do this? Why would they mess around with a children's book? Well, you got to test something somewhere. You got to see how things work. And then you hear that they're starting to mess with the Bible. Somebody appears to have been messing with the Bible around the 2008 timeframe. And so, these are, and the Bible talks about the grand delusion, how people are going to be totally confused and deluded. And one of the reasons I would expect is because of this combination of rhetoric, that's the shallow wizard level, And then there is the higher level of altering reality through your words. Now think about it. Why does Jordan Peterson say to choose your words very, very carefully? Why is he always saying that you have to choose your words so carefully? Because he believes that you use them to alter your reality. It's kind of I don't know if you're familiar with the evangelical craze. It was the what did they call it? We used to call it name it, claim it, because that was the pejorative expression. But it was these preachers who were going around basically saying that your word, you have the godlike ability to create things that you want to happen. If you named it, I want, you would confess it to yourself. Scott Adams, by the way, is definitely into this stuff. Scott Adams talks about how he wrote down every day that he was going to be a syndicated columnist or syndicated cartoonist and be very successful. And this is all prosperity gospel. That's it. All of this stuff is the same. Whether you call it prosperity gospel, whether you call it the name it, claim it, the power of positive thinking, all of these things are being utilized in order to allow people to alter reality according to their will. And that is exactly what magic is. Magic and magic spells have always been about altering reality with the power of your will. Now, the Bible is directly opposed to this. Why? Because as Christians, we are here to serve God's will, not our own. That's why, for example, we have a dog who has been ill. He's fighting for his life. And, if I believed in magic, then I would attempt to exert my will over reality and heal the dog. But being a Christian, I ask God to heal the dog. One hopes he will. But, I don't attempt to exert my will, because what do we pray as part of the Lord's Prayer? Thy will be done. And for those Mandela fans, on earth as it is in heaven. And so all of this stuff, as above, so below, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. That is literal straight Crowleyism, and that is exactly what Jordan Peterson teaches. I realize that some of you don't realize that because you haven't read 12 Rules of Life closely enough. A lot of people read the 12 Rules of Life and they just read the rule, the superficial rule, and they don't realize that in the entire chapter, Jordan Peterson never gets around to really discussing the rule. The chapter about cats, he barely mentions cats. It's ridiculous. Or at least it would be ridiculous if you didn't know what he was really talking about. Let me see if I can find that. Not really. Okay, so this is what the 10th principle of Jordanetics boils down to. Transcend the material world by very carefully choosing the words that will alter its reality. Why is he saying that? Why do you need to so carefully choose your words? Well, here's why. And these are Peterson. That's my summary of Peterson's words. But here is what Peterson actually wrote. These are Peterson's own words. When something goes wrong, Even perception itself must be questioned, along with evaluation, thought, and action. When error announces itself, undifferentiated chaos is at hand. In reptilian form, paralyzes and confuses. But dragons, which do exist, perhaps more than anything else exists, also hoard gold. In that collapse into the terrible mess of uncomprehended being lurks the possibility of new and benevolent order. Clarity of thought, courageous clarity of thought, is necessary to call it forth. So he's talking about magic there. He's talking about casting spells, changing reality through your words combined with your will. That's what Yeats attempted to do. That's what Crowley attempted to do. It's what Jack Parsons attempted to do. This is straight up occult magic practice. And so, it's really important to understand that there is substance under the Petersonian word salad. And what there is underneath it is a basic 101 course in spell casting. And so the Cubby Bear says that sounds like mumbo jumbo. It's not about whether you believe it. It's about whether he does. And the way that he confuses people, I thought it was really creepy, amazingly creepy, that a woman who wrote this review of Jordanetics, she said that she took a passage from Tolkien that described how people reacted to Saruman's voice. And it was really interesting because Saruman's voice and his persuasion, and again, what is rhetoric? Rhetoric is the art of persuasion. But it was fascinating to read Tolkien's description of Saruman and see how closely it resembled the way that people react to Peterson's voice. I had always thought of Peterson as being more of a Grima Wormtongue, but after reading that, I realized she was right. Owen is right. Peterson is a wizard. He's a Saruman. And that's why so many people find it so easily to be ensorcelled by his words and by his evil teachings. Vox, you, Owen Benjamin, and Devin Stack are blowing my mind this week. Well, good. The first key to seeing through the spell is to understand that, number one, there is objective truth. Anyone who attempts to convince you otherwise, anyone who tries to spin around that, redefine it, is attempting to obscure your ability to see that. The second thing to realize is that you need to, whenever you see somebody offering multiple definitions for a word or new definitions for a word that you already know is defined differently, that gives them away every time. Every single time. I call it the bait and switch. And Dawkins does it. Sam Harris does it. Peterson does it incessantly. And whenever you see somebody giving you alternate definitions, new definitions of their own creation, they are not an honest person. They are a deceiver. They're probably, what Owen would call a wizard. How do you know someone is not? How do you know someone? Because what they will do is they will create a new word, a neologism, in order to make sure that you distinguish your stuff. that you distinguish the new concept from the old. Jimmy Jones says, people think all this wizardry stuff is nonsense. It is, but it's important to know because there are entire mental realities that people live in that are hardly known by outsiders. But that's just the thing. It's not nonsense because it works. Even if you can't accept the second level, you must accept the first level. The first level is entirely on the material plane. There's nothing religious about it. There's nothing spiritual about it. It simply is. Rhetoric is a term very clearly defined 2,400 years ago. It's about the art of persuasion through emotion. And you can read up all about it. I wrote about it in SJWs. Aristotle wrote about it much more deeply and importantly in his book Rhetoric. But it is real. What about functional definitions? Well, functional definitions are fine, but again, you should be using, if you need to use a term, if you need a new concept, then come up with a term for it. I've had discussions about, and it's kind of funny. My son was asking me once why I always come up with these terms like volitions and apravisten, and at one point we were talking, and I said something about, well, it's pseudo dialectic, it's not rhetoric. And he just started laughing because he said, well, now I'm beginning to understand why you make up words all the time, because in the context of our conversation, we actually needed a word. We actually needed words for rhetoric that was intended to sound like dialectic, and rhetoric that was openly rhetoric. And so, we had pseudo-dialectic and rhetoric. Well, rhetoric is a horrible term, but we needed it in the context of that conversation. And so, someone who is honest, in general, will utilize neologisms. Okay? Someone who is very dishonest will actually prefer to use a term that doesn't mean what you think it means. Peterson is just off the charts in this regard, because he'll say you have chaos, you have order, and then in the middle you have a more perfect order. How is that clarifying in any regard? It's not clarifying, it's confusing. It's intentionally confusing. In Jordanetics, I described it as the middle way. Just how difficult is it to just say the middle way? Too much oppression is bad, or too much of the realm of oppression is bad. Too much of the realm of tyranny is bad. So therefore, you should take the middle way. That's what he says. But because he engages in this word smog and then labels the middle way a more perfect order, it's totally confusing. Most people are not capable of staying focused long enough to understand clearly and to comprehend intellectually exactly what's being said. And so, and then you look at things like Ben Shapiro and the neocons. They successfully convinced people that they were conservatives when they were actually world revolutionary Trotskyites. But they didn't even have they didn't even call themselves conservatives. They said, well, we're neoconservatives. We're the new conservatives, or as I would call them, not conservatives. And when you look at, anytime somebody is saying neo, just mentally think of it as not. If you talk about the average the politics of the average neo-Nazi. He has politics that do not resemble in very many ways at all the policies of the German National Socialist Workers' Party. A neoconservative is not a conservative. A neoliberal, not a liberal. And you look at the other word magic they play, Judeo-Christianity. Total nonsense. Totally antithetical to everything about Christianity and about Judaism. And so, it's really it's really very clear that whenever you see people perverting these definitions, and remember, Judeo-Christian actually meant something before they tried to pervert the meaning of it. Judeo-Christian means a Jew who became a Christian of Jewish ethnicity. But now they use it in terms of, so how can you even have a Judeo-Christian tradition, a Judeo-Christian heritage? You can't. It's totally nonsensical. But again, the wizards cast one of their spells, and now the word means something different, and reality has been altered. So, words, the more that you focus on the idea that words mean things, that definitions are not malleable, the faster you're going to see through the wizard spell. And the thing is, they have to conceal it. If you see them doing it, it's like watching a magician's trick. If you see the magician, jamming the ribbons up his sleeve, you're not fooled when he pulls it out again. And so when you see that they are modifying definitions, you're seeing through the trick. And then all you need to do is trace back what their objective is. You can trace back the objective by looking at how they perverted the definition, the nature of the spell. You can see what they're aiming at, and it all becomes very transparent to you very quickly. So, does this cast a shadow on Harry Potter? Certainly. Harry Potter is definitely mildly occultic. They call them Messianic Jews now. Yes, a Messianic Jew is a Judeo-Christian. That is the correct meaning of the term, Messianic Jew. Yeah, Buffy has a good point. Like pedos trying to relabel themselves minor attracted persons. That's a pretty ineffective spell. Public humiliation defeats wizards. It actually, well, this is why Owen is so much more effective than I am. There's nothing that defeats the wizard spells better than humor and mockery. When you are laughing at their attempt to deceive you, then they can't take it. They find it really, really humiliating. The power of positive deceit. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Let's see. Harry Potter paints the pure-blood wizards as evil. Seems like a pro-multiculturalism spell. Oh, no question. They even, they even made them all blonde and blue-eyed, and the pejorative they use for the mixed wizards is mudblood, which is probably derived from the pejorative term mudshark. Are wizards mostly gammas? No, I don't think so. I think gammas are more drawn to it because they tend to be a bit more intelligent. They tend to be a bit more verbal. But, if you look at the history of people like Crowley and whatnot, I wouldn't think so. So, Trumpy Bear says, I tuned in just now because of Big Bear. Want to see what all the hype is about. Well, I wouldn't call it hype, but, you know, I guess you could say that Oana and I are both natural skeptics. You know, it's kind of funny because the left always used to celebrate those who question authority. You know, they used to tell people, you should question authority. But it's kind of funny because when you actually do question authority, they try to come down on you like a ton of bricks. You know, just another lie. Do you think the Mandela effect could be the result of high-level witchcraft? I think it would be more likely the combination of science and witchcraft. You know, if I had to guess, you know, if it was real, I would guess that it is an occult science. What is the fate of a wizard? Why shouldn't one become one? Because once you embrace the lie, you warp your soul. You know, there's a reason why all of the fantasy literature about witches and wizards always tends to involve illusion. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Because their power is false. You know, their power is ultimately based on illusion and delusion. And, you know, those who see through the illusion rob them of their power. You know, the way that, think about the spell that Jordan Peterson casts upon his followers, the way that they react to him, the way that they get emotionally caught up in, you know, his eyes, and just he seems so wise and understanding and all that. Do you think there is any chance whatsoever that he's going to have that effect on me when I am sitting there calmly analyzing each thing that he does, that I understand, checking it off? Okay, so we have the thoughtful posture. We have the significant delay before answering the question. Okay, he just changed the subject completely with a incoherent leap from this to that. Oh, and notice that he just pretended that that was a syllogism that followed from the previous one, but it doesn't. You know, they can't cast a spell on you when you see through it. And the less you get remember, rhetoric is about emotional persuasion. So the less emotional you are about the information coming in, the more that you're able to detach yourself emotionally from it, the less it affects you. But if you give into it, and if you start speaking lies, in fact, I kind of rely on Owen in this matter. He talks about how liars have to lie. You know, somebody once said about Bill Clinton that he would rather climb a tree to tell a lie than stand on the ground to tell the truth. People who are habitual liars just do that. And, you know, maybe you've done it. Maybe you've been telling a story and then, you know, especially if you're a storyteller like I am. I mean, I'm literally a novelist. I tell stories. You know, there's times when sometimes you embellish a story or you change the details, not to necessarily to impress somebody or something, but in order to make the story better. You know, one of my friends noticed that I sometimes like to tell stories about myself that make me look bad, even when it didn't happen that way. But it's because I got oversensitized to people thinking that I was bragging. And sometimes people enjoy a story a lot more when the arrogant, confident guy gets his comeuppance. It's funny, you know. Is that telling a lie? I suppose to a certain extent you could. You know, say it. Is it telling a lie when you tell a story about yourself, but you tell it as if it's happened to someone else? You know, or vice versa. I don't know, but the point is that the more that you do it, the easier it is to do it the second time, and that's why it's very important when you are somebody who is in the public eye to be ruthless in telling the truth. That doesn't mean that you need to, share your life story. I tend to keep a lot of the personal details of my life to myself, because there's a lot of people who hate me, and they want to use any information whatsoever that they can get about me against me. So I'm not going to put that out there. If it was necessary, I wouldn't hesitate to deceive them. But that's very different than just allowing yourself to lie willy-nilly because it makes you look better, or because you want to act like you're right, or you want to act like you know something that you don't. I mean, if you take one thing out of this, as personal advice, what I would say is be ruthlessly honest with yourself. Don't deceive yourself, because if you deceive yourself, you don't really have a good way of coming back from that. If you can successfully convince yourself of one falsehood, you can successfully convince yourself of any number of them. And it's just better to tell the truth, because, for example, there's 604 people viewing here. Okay. I don't want to try to keep track of what I told 604 people. If I tell you 604 people one thing and then I tell another 30 people something else, I've got to keep track of who I told what. This isn't out of any moral virtue. This isn't out of, a superior moral character. It's just about practicality. What is the key to self-control? I think it is ruthless self-honesty. Sometimes you have to admit, you know what? I shouldn't have eaten that cookie. I'm not in as good a shape as I'd like to think I am. My shoulder hurts. I can't bench what I think I can. Let's see here. What is a sin against the spirit? I don't know offhand. About to crush Shapiro's numbers. Oh, I think we've got a long, long way before we're doing that. Are you guys open to the possibility you guys heard Stein because the opening theme song sounds like Stein? So no, I'm a reader. I don't think I ever saw any. I don't think I even knew that there was a animated cartoon. Is Jordan a Gnostic, a Mason, or something else? He's a Gnostic and occultist. Are you guys using magic and wizards as a euphemism for mass manipulation via public figures, popular culture, and media? Yes and no. On one level, yes. I specifically refer to rhetoric as verbal magic, but there is a deeper level to it. It's described in Jordanetics. What Jordan Peterson is talking about goes beyond rhetoric and goes into the spiritual level. He's a practicing occultist. And if you don't believe me, just read his book. What he does when he talks about his newfound pen of light, he's engaged in an occult practice called automatic writing. W.B. Yeats was famous for using it. It's basically the same approach as a Ouija board. Let's see. Occult science. Does this suggest that they retroactively alter things like print on paper? Yeah, it's just a hypothesis. Okay. You guys need to understand when I talk about ideas, I'm talking about hypotheticals. I'm talking about metaphorical probabilities. I am not talking about this is absolutely definitely the case. I'm telling you. Look, if I am going to tell you something that I believe to be factual, I will let you know. If we are brainstorming, if we're talking about things that I have a vague glimmering that things might possibly be a certain way, I'll let you know that too. Well, if we're talking about something like omnitemporal quantum editing of reality, we're well into the hypothetical, okay? So just chill. Joseph says, it's a wondrous possibility. And Zachlug said, would God allow us to develop history rewriting technology? No, I don't believe that God would. I think that it would directly violate God's laws. And that's why I think that we have a pretty good idea that if it was happening, if it could be happening, and remember, if it is being done, it is affecting everything omnitemporal. It's affecting everything all times at the same time. And if that's true, the only thing that they're not going to be able to touch would be that which is not temporal. In other words, it can't touch the soul. And that's where we have a pretty good idea that if there's anything to that concept, it is an intrinsically spiritual concept. And that's why we know that we're dealing with evil. Again, assuming that there's even a remote possibility that such a thing could possibly be true. All I'm saying is that don't ever make the mistake of thinking that because we have a understanding of how things work today, that is the same understanding that we will have tomorrow. Think about X-rays. Think about Wi-Fi. Think about all these amazing technologies that we take for granted that would look every bit as impossible to somebody living 50, 100, 200, 500 years ago. It seems like you have to operate on the basis that you can trust that the past isn't being changed, even if it is possible. Otherwise, you can't trust anything about reality, which leads nowhere. Well, again, but we have an idea that some things are eternal, that some things are not susceptible to that. Something to keep in mind, anyhow. Let's see. We are not physical beings at the core. Exactly. Do you think human microchipping will bring the capacity to change human traits from the chips? Yes, and that's why I think that you shouldn't ever let them do it. Somebody said Owen and I should be a wrestling tag team. I'm 50 years old, okay? I can handle myself, but I'm not, I think my ring fighting days are long over. I have fought in public. I've fought in rings. We put on a pretty intense, full contact exhibition at Glam Slam once under the spotlight, under like the lights with industrial music going. It was pretty crazy. Let's see. Are bears your favorite animal? No. I'm generally known for liking otters. Vox, how much do you bench? I have no idea these days. I've been dealing with shoulder issues for like the past 3.5 years. My max, which I definitely cannot do now, was 325. Diana is very kind. She says, you look about 32. It's the soft light. Let's see. I know the snowman. Is CRISPR technology applied to humans inherently evil? I don't think necessarily. I mean, I think it probably will be used for evil, but I don't think it is intrinsically evil. Vox, what's your take on Jesus saying that you cannot be his disciple unless you hate your mother and father? I think he's speaking metaphorically about your priorities. Anyhow, that's all for today. But I look forward to seeing you the next time. Again, you know, when we're talking about this stuff, understand that I like to entertain new thoughts. The crazier they are, the more interesting I find them, the more intriguing it is. So, you know, don't get distracted by the fact that what we're talking about might sound crazy. You know, if you want to go into conventional mainstream science, if you want to just sit and grind out economic statistics, you know, read my books. You know I can do it. You know, but I think that this is a lot more interesting, and I think the stuff that Owen's been talking about with regards to the importance of seeing through the wizard spells is absolutely vital, and I hope that you've learned something about how to do that. So, have a good evening. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream, and in the meantime, don't fall for the spells.